I paid $1 for an abandoned railroad tower because I had nowhere else to sleep. The county warned me that the stairs could collapse, the roof might fall, and no one had worked there since a deadly train wreck nearly 40 years earlier. But the moment my retired German Shepherd, Echo, entered the tower, she froze beside an old dispatch desk and refused to move. Hidden inside was a letter addressed to me in my father's handwriting. The problem was, my father had disappeared when I was 9 years old, and the letter was dated 11 years after he vanished. Before this night was over, the tower would burn. A man would try to kill us. And Echo would uncover the truth that my entire town had been paid to forget. Stay with me, because the final secret beneath that railroad tower changed everything I believed about my father. On the morning I bought an abandoned railroad tower for $1, the woman behind the county desk made me sign 3 separate papers confirming that I understood it might kill me. She pushed the final page across the counter and tapped the bottom line with one crooked finger. "The stairs are rotten," she said. "The roof leaks. There is no running water, no electricity, and no legal road leading all the way to the property." I looked through the courthouse window at my truck parked beneath a bare maple tree. Everything I still owned was inside that truck: a duffel bag, a wool blanket, a dented coffee pot, my wife's wedding ring in a small wooden box, and Echo, my retired German Shepherd, sitting upright behind the steering wheel as though she were waiting for someone to give her a mission. "I understand," I said. The woman studied me over the rim of her glasses. She was 72 years old according to the brass nameplate on her desk, which listed 41 years of county service beneath her name. Ada Pike had silver hair pinned close to her head and the steady expression of someone who had watched generations of men make decisions they were too proud to reconsider. "You have not seen the place," she said. "I saw the photographs. Those photographs were taken 12 years ago. Then it has had 12 more years to become affordable." Ada did not smile, but one corner of her mouth moved. "It was already affordable, Mr. Mercer. That is not the problem." She opened a thin folder and turned it toward me. The first page showed a narrow wooden building raised above an abandoned rail junction on black timber legs. Half of the windows were missing. Kudzu covered the eastern wall. A rusted staircase climbed nearly 30 feet from the ground to a room that looked too small to contain anything but dust and regret. The faded lettering beneath the photograph read Marrow Creek Signal Tower, built in 1942 and decommissioned in 1989, scheduled for demolition. "You will also assume responsibility for removing any hazardous material," Ada continued. "The county will not repair the access trail. There may be lead paint. There may be asbestos. There may be animals inside. I have lived with worse." Her eyes moved from my face to the scars across my right hand. "Most people looked away when they noticed them. Ada did not." "You were military," she said. "I was. What branch?" "United States Navy." She waited, knowing there was more. I had learned that people in small Kentucky towns could recognize silence the way sailors recognized a change in the wind. "I served with a special operations team," I said. Ada closed the folder. "And now? Now I am buying a condemned railroad tower." That was not what I asked. I looked back toward my truck. Echo had not moved. Her ears stood high above the dashboard, and her amber eyes were fixed on the courthouse door. She had been trained to detect explosives, track movement through broken terrain, and place herself between danger and the man beside her. She had never been trained to understand grief. Somehow, she understood it better than anyone. "My wife died 18 months ago," I said. "The hospital bills took the house. The bank took the rest." Ada's expression softened, but only for a moment. "Children? No. Family? None who are waiting for me." That was not entirely true. My mother was still alive in a care facility outside Knoxville, but she had not recognized me during my last 3 visits. The nurses said she still spoke my father's name at night. Walter. Always Walter. The man who walked out when I was 9 years old and left my mother to work 2 jobs until her hands swelled too badly to close around a coffee cup. The man whose absence taught me everything I knew about leaving before someone could leave me. Ada placed a fountain pen beside the contract. "The county asked for $1 because $1 makes this a sale," she said. "A sale transfers responsibility. They are not giving you a gift." I stopped believing in gifts a long time ago. That sounds expensive. It was. For the first time, Ada smiled. I signed my name, Owen Mercer, 47 years old, former United States Navy Special Operations operator, widower, homeless, owner of one abandoned railroad tower. Ada opened a drawer, removed a large iron key, and placed it in my palm. It was longer than my middle finger and cold enough to sting. "This opens the ground gate," she said. "The tower door has not had a lock in years. Is there anything else I should know?" She leaned back in her chair. Yes, I waited. My father worked at Marrow Creek. The words changed the air between us. What did he do? He maintained the signal relays. He was there on the night of the Hollow Bend derailment. I knew the name. Everyone raised within 100 miles of the Cumberland Plateau knew it. A freight train had left the tracks during a winter storm more than 30 years earlier. 3 crewmen died. 2 cars rolled into a ravine. Diesel burned for 2 days, and the railroad blamed a signal operator who disappeared before investigators could question him. That operator had been my father, Walter Mercer. My mother never spoke about the wreck. She did not defend him, and she did not condemn him. Whenever I asked, she would say only that some truths were too heavy to carry into a child's room. By the time I was old enough to demand an answer, she had already begun losing pieces of her memory. I stared at Ada. "You knew who I was when I walked in. I knew your last name, and you still sold me the tower. I processed a legal transaction. That is not what I asked." Ada removed her glasses and folded them carefully on the desk. My father believed Walter Mercer was innocent. A pulse began beating behind my eyes. What did he know? He never told me. Then why did he believe it? Because my father knew the signals at Marrow Creek. He said no single operator could have caused what happened that night. I leaned forward. Did he speak to investigators? He tried. What happened? He lost his job. 6 months later, he suffered a stroke. He could still walk, but he never spoke another clear sentence. Outside, a church bell rang the hour. Echo stood inside my truck. Ada looked toward the window. There were people who wanted that tower torn down immediately after the wreck, she said. The railroad refused because of an insurance dispute. Then the company changed hands. The branch closed, and everyone decided forgetting was easier. Why has nobody searched it? People have. And some found empty bottles. Some found snakes. One man fell through the lower landing and broke his hip. That is not what you meant. No, she said. It is not. I waited for her to continue, but she put her glasses back on and pulled the next folder toward her. Our conversation was finished. I closed my fingers around the iron key. You could have told me this before I signed. You might have walked away. Maybe I should. Ada lowered her eyes to the paperwork. Maybe you should. I left the courthouse with the key in my pocket and more questions than I had carried inside. Echo moved from the driver's seat the moment she saw me. She climbed across the console and waited beside the passenger door. I opened it. She stepped down, circled me once, and pressed her nose against my left hand. That was where I held tension. She had learned it during our final deployment, after an explosion left 3 pieces of metal in my shoulder and a sound inside my head that never completely stopped. I bought it, I told her. Echo looked up at me. $1. Her tail moved once. The woman says it might collapse. Echo sneezed. I agree. That sounded personal. I opened the rear door and showed her the folder. She sniffed the photograph of the tower, then placed one paw on the running board. You have stronger opinions about lunch. At the word lunch, both ears turned toward me. That is what I thought. We drove east out of town beneath a sky the color of unpolished steel. Late November had stripped the trees bare. The Cumberland hills rose in long dark folds, their ridges covered with oak, hickory, and pine. Thin streams moved beside the road, flashing silver between banks of wet stone. My truck was 23 years old and had a heater that worked only when climbing a hill. Every few miles, the dashboard rattled hard enough to sound like loose ammunition. Echo sat beside me, watching the landscape. She had been 7 years old when the Navy retired her after a blast damaged the hearing in her left ear. I had signed the adoption papers before the veterinarian finished explaining her condition. People asked whether I had rescued her. The question always seemed backward. During the worst year of my life, Echo woke me from nightmares, forced me outside when I had stopped caring whether morning came. and once placed her entire body across the front door when I tried to leave without her. She had never allowed me to disappear. My wife Caroline loved her for that. During Caroline's final months, Echo slept between the hospital bed and the bedroom door. When the pain became severe, she rested her head beside Caroline's hand and stayed so still that nurses sometimes checked whether she was breathing. The night Caroline died, Echo did not make a sound. She simply walked through the house collecting things that carried Caroline's scent. A slipper, a scarf, a gardening glove. Then she placed them beside my chair and lay down with her chin on my boot. 18 months later I had lost the house, but the scarf was still behind the seat. I reached across the cab and touched Echo's neck. "We are going to need a roof before dark." She leaned into my hand for half a second, then returned her attention to the road. The paved highway narrowed into a county route. The county route became gravel. The gravel ended at a steel gate chained between two limestone posts. A sign hung crookedly from the center. "Danger, abandoned railway property, entry prohibited." Someone had painted a red circle around the word danger. I parked and examined the ground. Fresh tire tracks crossed the mud in front of the gate. The tread was wide and deep, probably from a heavy truck. Rain had fallen the previous evening, which meant the vehicle had been there within the last 12 hours. Ada had said there was no legal road to the tower. She had not said nobody used the trail. Echo jumped down and lowered her nose to the tracks. She followed them toward the gate, stopped and looked into the woods. Her body became still. Not frightened. "Working. What do you have?" She moved beneath the chain and disappeared around the nearest limestone post. I unlocked the gate and followed. The trail descended through thick trees for nearly half a mile. Old railroad ties appeared beneath the leaves, gray and split, embedded in the earth like the ribs of a buried animal. The tracks had been removed years ago, but twin lines of darker soil showed where the rails once ran. Echo stayed 10 yards ahead. Every few minutes she stopped and tested the air. The tire tracks continued down the trail. They were heading in the same direction we were. I kept my right hand close to my jacket. I was no longer carrying a service weapon. The county courthouse prohibited firearms, and the pistol I owned was locked beneath the truck seat. But old habits did not depend on weapons. They depended on exits, angles, cover, and the small changes in sound that told a man he was no longer alone. The tower appeared through the trees without warning. It rose above a junction where 3 abandoned rail lines once met. The structure stood on black timber supports, with a narrow room at the top and a covered staircase zigzagging upward along one side. Broken windows reflected the gray sky. Vines hung from the railings. A rusted signal mast stood beside it, its round lenses dark. At ground level, a small brick relay building leaned toward the creek. The photographs had not captured the scale of the place. They had not captured the loneliness either. Marrow Creek Signal Tower did not look abandoned. It looked accused. Echo walked into the clearing and stopped. Her ears rose. She stared at the upper room. Then she made a sound I had heard only twice before, a low breath drawn through a closed mouth. During our deployments, it meant she had detected something familiar where it did not belong. I moved beside her. "What is it?" She did not look at me. A section of plastic sheeting moved behind one of the broken windows. The wind had stopped. I studied the staircase. Several boards were missing. One railing leaned outward. Mud marked the first step. Someone had climbed the tower recently. "Stay close." Echo followed as I approached. The first landing groaned beneath my weight. I tested every board before trusting it. Echo moved more carefully than she had in her younger years, favoring the hind leg that stiffened in cold weather. Halfway up she stopped and sniffed the railing. There was a dark smear on the wood. Grease, fresh. Above us, something scraped across the floor. Echo's head snapped upward. I raised one hand, signaling her to wait. The old command returned to both of us without effort. I climbed 3 more steps. The tower room had a door hanging from one hinge. Through the opening, I saw broken glass, a row of cracked control panels, and the edge of a wooden desk. No movement. I reached the top landing and listened. Water moved in the creek below. A branch tapped the roof. Somewhere inside the room, metal clicked once. I stepped through the doorway. Echo entered beside my left leg. The room stretched nearly 40 feet from end to end. Windows lined every wall, giving the operators a clear view of each track. Most of the glass was gone, but the western windows remained intact beneath a film of dirt. A long control console occupied the center. Dozens of levers rose from it, their handles painted in faded red, green, and yellow. Paper labels beneath the levers, of sidings and junctions that no longer existed. Hollow Bend, Carter Mine, South Fork. A pot-bellied stove stood in one corner, 2 wooden chairs faced it. At the far end of the room sat the dispatch desk. Echo walked past me, her pace changed. She was no longer searching the whole room. She had chosen a direction. She crossed to the desk, sniffed the floor, then turned toward a narrow cabinet built beneath the western windows. The cabinet door was open. Inside, dust had been disturbed. A clean rectangle marked the shelf where something had recently been removed. I crouched beside it. Boot prints covered the floor. One set was fresh and broad, matching the tracks outside. Whoever had entered the tower knew where to look. Echo backed away from the cabinet and moved toward the center console. She pressed her nose against the gap beneath it. Then she began to growl. The sound was quiet, almost too low to hear. I lowered myself and looked beneath the console. A length of copper wire ran into a hole in the floor. It was newer than anything else in the room. I followed it with my eyes. The wire crossed beneath the boards and disappeared toward the staircase wall. I found the other end tied to a small battery and a crude pressure switch beneath the loose mat inside the doorway. It was not an explosive, it was an alarm. Anyone stepping on the mat would complete the circuit and ring something elsewhere in the tower. I disconnected the battery. A second later, a bell rang below us, one sharp metallic strike. Echo spun toward the doorway. Footsteps hit the lower stairs, fast, heavy. Someone had been waiting beneath the tower. I moved Echo behind the console and took position beside the doorway. The footsteps climbed to the first landing, then stopped. Silence returned. I heard breathing below. A man's voice called upward. "You bought something that did not belong to you." I did not answer. The voice sounded middle-aged, rough, and close enough that I could hear the wetness in his lungs. "You hear me, Mercer?" He knew my name. Echo's muscles tightened beneath my hand. The man continued, "The county sold you lumber and liability. Whatever else is in that tower belongs to the railroad. The railroad abandoned it. The railroad is not the party you need to worry about." I leaned toward the broken window and looked down. A man stood beneath the first landing where the staircase turned. He wore a dark canvas coat and an orange hunting cap pulled low over his face. One gloved hand rested on the railing. A second man waited beside a black pickup at the edge of the clearing. They had parked on the far side of the tower, hidden from the trail. The man on the stairs looked up. I saw a thick neck, a gray beard, and a pale scar running from his left ear to his jaw. "You have until sunset," he said. "Take your dog and leave." "What happens at sunset?" "We finished the demolition survey." "There is no demolition order." "There will be." He descended before I could answer. The second man opened the truck door. Echo moved toward the stairs, but I held her collar. "Not yet." The truck crossed the clearing and disappeared along a service trail on the southern side. I remained at the window until the engine faded. Then I checked the tower again. The men had searched the cabinet, several drawers, and a metal locker beside the stove. They had not taken copper or anything else with obvious value. They were looking for something specific. Echo returned to the dispatch desk. She placed her nose against one leg and inhaled several times. Then she sat. "Did they miss something?" She stared at me. I ran my hand along the disk. The surface was scarred by decades of use. Names had been carved into one edge. A circle from a coffee cup darkened the corner. The center drawer was locked, but the wood around it showed no recent damage. Echo lowered her head and pushed her nose beneath the desk. I knelt beside her. A thin draft touched my fingers. The tower walls were full of gaps, but the air was coming from inside the desk itself. I removed the bottom drawer. Behind it was a narrow wooden panel. 4 screws held the panel in place. 3 were rusted. The 4th was new. Someone had found the compartment and replaced the screw after searching it. I used the edge of the iron gate key to loosen it. The panel came away. The compartment behind it appeared empty. Echo sniffed once, then pushed her muzzle deeper into the opening. Her claws scraped the floorboards. She shifted right, stopped and looked at me. I reached inside and felt along the upper edge. My fingers touched metal. A small latch had been installed above the visible compartment. I pressed it. Something released inside the desk with a soft wooden knock. A second panel dropped from beneath the writing surface. An envelope slid out and landed on the floor. It was yellow with age and sealed with dark red wax. My name was written across the front, Owen Mercer. The handwriting was unmistakable. I had seen it on birthday cards during the first 9 years of my life. I had seen it on the only note my father left behind. I picked up the envelope with both hands. In the upper corner, beneath a layer of dust, someone had written a date. It was dated 11 years after my father disappeared. Echo sat beside me, watching my face. Outside, far down the abandoned line, a train horn sounded. There had not been a working railroad within 20 miles of Marrow Creek for more than 3 decades. Still, the sound came again, long, low, and close enough to make the broken windows tremble. The third blast of the train horn lasted longer than the first 2. It rolled through the valley with enough force to shake dust from the rafters. Echo rose beside me, her ears aimed toward the southern line. I crossed to the broken window and searched the abandoned tracks below. There was no train. There could not have been one. The rails had been removed before I entered high school. Trees now grew from the old track bed. Some were thick enough that I could not have wrapped both arms around their trunks. Yet the horn had sounded like it came from somewhere beyond the curve. Close, powerful, real. Echo moved away from the window and crossed the tower room. Instead of looking outside, she stopped beside the old control console. Her nose traveled along the steel panels until she reached a round opening beneath the row of signal levers. A brass speaking tube disappeared into the floor. I placed my ear against it. At first I heard only moving air, then came a faint metallic vibration. The horn was not coming from the valley. It was coming through the tower. Somewhere below us, air was passing through the abandoned signal system and making an old warning horn speak again. I looked at the crude alarm I had disconnected beneath the doorway. The men who threatened me had not merely searched the building. They had restored part of its machinery. They wanted the tower to make sounds. They wanted anyone who entered it to believe the dead railroad was waking up around them. Fear was cheaper than demolition. For most people, it probably worked. I turned back toward the envelope. My name waited on the yellow paper in my father's handwriting. For nearly 4 decades, I had imagined what I would say if Walter Mercer ever walked back into my life. I had built entire conversations during sleepless nights. In some, I hit him. In others, I asked him why. Sometimes, I pictured myself saying nothing at all. I would simply look at him until he understood that leaving had cost him the right to explain. I had never imagined receiving an answer from a hidden desk in a condemned railroad tower. Echo sat close enough that her shoulder touched my knee. I broke the wax seal. The paper inside was thin and folded several times. The first line was written carefully. The lines beneath it became increasingly uneven, as though the writer had been working against pain or exhaustion. Owen, if you are reading this, then someone failed to destroy the tower before you came looking. I stopped. The wind pressed through the broken windows. Somewhere beneath the floor, the old horn released a dying groan. I continued. You were 9 years old the last morning I saw you. You were sitting at the kitchen table, eating cornflakes from the blue bowl, with the crack along the rim. Your mother was standing at the stove. She was angry with me, though she tried not to let you see it. I remember thinking I would be home before supper. That memory has punished me every day since. My hands began to tighten around the letter. The blue bowl had belonged to my grandmother. My mother kept it for years after my father vanished. She used it until the crack split and milk began leaking through the side. No newspaper reporter could have known about it. No railroad investigator could have invented it. The letter was his. The wreck at Hollow Bend was not caused by a mistake in this tower. The signal was changed deliberately after the freight passed the northern marker. Someone opened the emergency circuit from the relay house and showed the engineer a clear track where no clear track existed. I saw the indication change. I also saw the man who changed it. His name does not belong in this letter. Paper can be found. Names can get people killed. The proof is in Marrow Creek. but not where a railroad man would search. You must understand something before you decide what to do. I did not leave because I wanted another life. I left because a man came to our house before sunrise and described the route you walked to school. He knew the color of your coat. He knew your teacher's name. He knew your mother stopped for gas every Friday after her second shift. He told me that if I spoke to federal investigators, the next accident would happen to my family. I read those lines twice. The room seemed to tilt beneath me. For 38 years I had remembered my father leaving through the back door before daylight. I remembered his work jacket, the shape of his shoulders, and my mother standing rigid beside the sink. I had believed he was escaping responsibility. Now I wondered whether he had been trying to draw danger away from us. The next paragraph was darker, where water had once touched the page. I made the wrong choice. I believed disappearing would protect you. Instead, I gave the men responsibility for what they wanted. They placed the blame on me. Your mother was left with their lies, and you grew up carrying my shame. I tried to return twice. The first time they followed me from Virginia. The second time I reached this tower and hid what I had collected. By then the company had changed names, but the same families still controlled the land, the contracts, and the story. If you have found this letter beneath the fifth red lever from the north window, do not pull it while the emergency circuit's connected. Disconnect the green cable in the relay building first. Trust the dog. I lowered the letter. Those final 3 words were written darker than the rest. Trust the dog. My father had not known Echo. He could not have known I would become a military handler. He could not have known that a German shepherd would lead me to the hidden compartment, unless the letter had not originally been written to me. I turned the page over. There was another line on the back. A good working dog will hear the relay before a man feels it through the floor. He had meant any trained dog used by the railroad patrols. Still, the words felt personal. Echo watched me with patient attention. He said to trust you. Her tail struck the floor once. I have been doing that for years. I folded the letter and placed it inside my jacket. Then I counted the red levers. The control console ran almost the full length of the room. Its paint had faded, but the levers retained traces of their original colors. Some were frozen in place. Others moved slightly when touched. I started at the north window. The fifth red lever stood beneath a cracked metal plate stamped with 2 words, Hollow Bend. I did not pull it. My father's warning had been direct. Disconnect the green cave first. The relay building was outside at ground level. So were the men who had threatened me. I walked to the western window and studied the clearing. Their truck had gone. I saw no movement among the trees. The southern service trail disappeared behind a wall of mountain laurel. Echo sniffed the doorway and descended the staircase ahead of me. The sky had darkened while I was inside. Thick clouds pressed against the ridges. The temperature had dropped, and the wind smelled of rain and distant snow. The brick relay building stood approximately 50 yards from the tower. Its steel door was secured with a chain, but the padlock had been cut recently. Bright metal showed beneath the rust. I pushed the door open. Echo entered first. The space was narrow and crowded with cabinets. Glass relays filled the shelves, each one attached to bundles of cloth-covered wire. Most of the equipment was dead, but a small generator hummed in the rear corner. It was a modern unit. Beside it sat 2 gasoline cans, a toolbox, and a plastic crate filled with electrical cable. Someone had spent days restoring selected parts of the old system. Echo followed a scent past the generator. She stopped at a green cable running along the wall and looked back at me. My father had said to disconnect it. The cable disappeared into an iron junction box. A handwritten tag hung from it, Emergency West Loop. I shut down the generator first. The hum died. Silence rushed into the room. I removed the green cable from its terminal. Far above us, something heavy released inside the tower. A deep mechanical clunk traveled through the timbers. Echo turned toward the door. A second sound came from behind the relay cabinets, not machinery, breathing. I raised one hand and signaled her to stay. There was barely space between the cabinets and the rear wall for a man to stand. I moved sideways, keeping my body low. A boot appeared beneath the final cabinet. Then it pulled back. I reached the end of the row. The space was empty. A narrow hatch in the brick wall stood open. Beyond it was a drainage tunnel running beneath the old rail bed. Someone had been inside the building while I disconnected the cable. I stepped through the hatch. The tunnel was less than 5 feet high. Water moved around my boots. Fresh mud covered the stone floor, along with deep prints from a work boot. Echo squeezed past me and followed the scent. The passage continued for approximately 20 yards before opening into a ditch south of the tower. A cigarette still burned in the wet leaves. The man had been close enough to touch. I crushed the cigarette beneath my boot and examined the filter. A black band circled the paper near the end. I had seen that brand before. My father smoked them. After he disappeared, my mother found an unopened package in the pocket of his winter coat. She kept it in a kitchen drawer for years, though she hated cigarettes. Black Harbor. I had not seen the brand since childhood. A sound moved through the trees uphill, an engine starting. Echo surged forward. Hold. She stopped but remained rigid, staring toward the service trail. The engine accelerated. Branches snapped. A vehicle moved away through the forest without using the main path. Whoever had hidden in the relay building had heard me reading the letter or had been waiting to see whether I found it. I returned to the tower. The staircase seemed less stable on the second climb. Wind pushed against the structure, making the supports complain beneath me. Inside, I placed both hands around the 5th red lever. The emergency cable was disconnected. I pulled. For several inches, nothing happened. Then the lever broke free with a violent jerk. A section of the console rose from the floor. Not the metal panel, the entire lever base. Beneath it, a narrow steel cylinder had been fitted between the floor joists. I removed the lid. Inside were 3 objects wrapped in oilcloth. The first was a bundle of dispatch sheets. The second was a small reel of magnetic recording tape sealed inside a metal case. The third was a photograph. I unwrapped it carefully. 4 men stood beside the relay building during summer. One was my father. He looked younger than I remembered, with dark hair combed away from his forehead and his work shirt open at the neck. Beside him stood a heavy man in a white railroad supervisor's uniform. His broad face held the effortless confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Ada's father stood at the opposite end. The 4th man wore no uniform. He wore a dark suit despite the heat and held one hand behind his back. A scar ran from his left ear to his jaw. The same scar I had seen on the man who threatened me. That was impossible. The photograph had to be more than 30 years old. The man outside looked no older than 60. I turned the photograph over. My father had written the names on the back: Walter Mercer, Ephraim Pike, Calvin Vale, Nathaniel Rusk. Below the final name, he had added another sentence. His son was there the night of the wreck. I remembered the scarred man's face. He was not Nathaniel Rusk. He was the son. I studied the dispatch sheets. They were carbon copies from the night of the derailment. Each line listed a train, a time, and a signal instruction. One entry had been circled in red pencil: Freight 86. Hold north of Hollow Bend. At the bottom of the page, the instruction had been changed. Proceed clear. The original signature read Walter Mercer. But beneath the copied ink, I could see the indentation of another signature. Someone had placed the page over a different document while writing. I needed light, paper, and time to reveal it. I had none of those things in the tower. Rain began striking the roof. The first drops came slowly. Then the sky opened. Water blew through the broken windows and crossed the floor in shining sheets. Echo paced toward the stairs. We are leaving. I returned the dispatch records and tape to the oilcloth, then placed everything inside my duffel bag. I kept the photograph and letter against my body. We reached the truck as thunder rolled over the ridge. The engine turned twice before starting. I drove back toward town, with the headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the rain. The gate stood open where I had left it, but new tracks crossed the road outside. The black pickup had returned while I was in the tower. Its tires led toward town. Ada Pike was the only living person I knew who might recognize the names in the photograph. I found her at a small diner across from the courthouse. The building glowed beneath a red sign, its windows fogged by heat. 3 pickup trucks occupied the lot. An American flag snapped above the entrance in the storm. Echo shook rain from her coat before we entered. A few customers looked up. Then they noticed my dog, my soaked clothes, and the mud on my boots. They returned quietly to their meals. Ada sat alone in the rear booth with a bowl of soup and a newspaper folded beside her. She saw my expression and put down her spoon. "You opened the desk," she said. I sat opposite her. "You knew about the letter. I suspected there was one. You knew my father came back. My father saw him." The answer struck harder than I expected. "When?" 11 years after the wreck." "Why did you not tell me at the courthouse?" "Because I did not know why you had come. I came to buy the tower. You came carrying everything you owned. That is not the same thing." I placed the photograph on the table. Ada looked at it for a long time. When her finger touched the image of her father, it trembled. "I have not seen this since I was a girl." "You have seen it before?" "It was taken during the inspection that summer." The railroad had been losing money on the Marrow Creek branch. Equipment vanished. Repair funds were approved, but repairs were never made. She pointed to the heavy man in the white uniform. Calvin Vale controlled the regional contracts. He billed the railroad for work his own companies never completed. And Nathaniel Rusk? Security, the man who came to the tower, was his son. Ada's face changed. "Jonah Rusk? You know him?" "Everyone knows him. He owns Cinder Ridge Recovery, the demolition company." She nodded. "His father died 6 years ago. Jonah took over several properties and contracts. He has been trying to obtain the Marrow Creek parcel since the county claimed it for unpaid taxes. Why, timber, stone, scrap metal. That was what he said. He threatened me." Ada looked toward the front windows. The rain distorted the lights outside. "Did he see what you found?" "I do not know." "That means yes." She folded the photograph inside a napkin and pushed it back to me. "You should not return tonight. My belongings are there. So is a man who has waited 3 decades for that tower to be empty." I disconnected his generator. Ada's eyes lifted sharply. "You did what?" "My father's letter told me to disconnect the emergency circuit." "Then Jonah knows you found the compartment." "Why?" "Because the circuit was not only connected to the tower horn." She stood quickly and reached for her coat. "What else did it control?" "The old telephone line." "There was no telephone upstairs." "Not upstairs." Ada dropped several bills beside her bowl. "The signal keeper's house." We ran through the rain to my truck. Ada climbed into the passenger seat while Echo moved behind us. She directed me east through town, then onto a road that climbed the ridge above Marrow Creek. The signal keeper's house stood less than 2 miles from the tower. It was a low stone cottage hidden behind pine trees and a collapsed fence. A light burned inside. Ada gripped the dashboard. "No one lives here." I stopped beside the road and killed the headlights. The black pickup was parked behind the cottage. Echo pressed between the seats. A growl formed in her chest. Ada whispered, "Jonah inherited this house from his father." "What was the telephone line used for?" "Emergency communication between the tower and the house." "My father said Calvin Vale sometimes held private meetings here because railroad inspectors never came this far into the hills." The light inside the cottage moved. A shadow crossed the curtain. I stepped out. Ada caught my sleeve. "You are not in the Navy anymore." "No, you do not know how many men are inside." "No. You may be walking into a trap." "I know." "Then why are you going?" I looked toward the cottage because someone followed us from the tower. "If Jonah knows I found the compartment, he will not wait until morning." I opened the rear door. Echo jumped down. "Stay in the truck," I told Ada. She gave me a look that suggested I had insulted both her intelligence and her age. Then she reached beneath her coat and produced a small revolver. "My father gave this to me after Walter returned," she said. "I have carried it for 27 years. I did not argue." We approached through the trees. Echo moved ahead without a leash, using the darkness and rain as cover. At the rear of the house, she stopped beside an open cellar door. Voices rose from below. One belonged to Jonah Rusk. The other was younger. "You said the letter was gone," the younger man said. "It was." "Then how did Mercer find it?" "He had the dog." "What difference does a dog make?" "It found the false panel." Something heavy struck a table. Jonah spoke again. "The tape is what matters. Vale's voice is on it. My father's voice is on it. If Mercer plays that recording in front of anyone who remembers the case, every parcel connected to the settlement can be challenged. You told me the tape was ruined. I was told it was ruined. And now Mercer has it." Ada looked at me. I touched the duffel bag over my shoulder. The tape was still inside. A floorboard creaked behind us. Echo turned. The younger man stood at the top of the cellar stairs. He held a short wooden club in one hand. Echo struck him before he could swing. She did not bite. She hit him in the chest with her full weight, knocking him backward through the doorway. The club fell into the mud. Jonah appeared below with a pistol. I pulled Ada behind the stone wall as a shot broke through the rain. The bullet struck the cellar door and threw splinters across the yard. Echo disappeared into the darkness. Echo, cover. She moved behind an old water barrel. Jonah climbed halfway up the steps. You should have taken the dollar loss, he called. You threatened a child to silence my father. That was my father's business. You are still protecting it. I am protecting what belongs to my family. The truth does not belong to you. No, he said. But the land does. He fired again. The second bullet struck the stone above my shoulder. Ada raised her revolver, but I pushed the barrel down. The range was poor. The rain was heavy. Jonah had cover. A vehicle engine started on the far side of the cottage. The younger man had reached the pickup. Jonah backed down the stairs and slammed the cellar door. By the time I circled the house, the black truck was moving across the field. Jonah ran from a side entrance and climbed into the passenger door while the vehicle was still rolling. Echo chased them to the tree line. I called her back. The truck vanished down a logging trail. Ada entered the cottage through the kitchen. Drawers had been pulled open. Papers covered the floor. An old telephone sat on a table beside the wall. Its receiver hung from the cord. A green light glowed beneath the dial. The line from the tower was active. On the table beside it lay a county map. Marrow Creek signal tower had been circled in red. Across the bottom, someone had written a time. Midnight. Ada looked at her watch. It was 20 minutes past 10. What happens at midnight? I asked. She shook her head. Then I smelled gasoline. It was faint inside the house. On my jacket, it was stronger. I pulled the duffel bag from my shoulder. The fabric was wet. Not with rain. Someone had cut the outer pocket while we were beside the cellar and pushed a small tracking device inside. A red light blinked beneath a strip of black tape. Jonah had not been trying to take the bag. He wanted to know where I carried it. The meaning of the map became clear. He is going back to the tower, I said. Ada looked toward the storm. To search it? To destroy it? We ran to the truck. The road to Marrow Creek had become a river of mud. Branches fell across the windshield. The heater blew cold air against my hands while the engine strained up the final hill. Echo stood behind me, restless and focused. At 11:30, we reached the county gate. It had been torn from its hinges. At 11:40, I saw fire through the trees. The top of the tower glowed orange against the black sky. Flames climbed from the western wall and rolled beneath the roof. Burning boards fell through the staircase. Smoke poured across the clearing. A bulldozer stood near the southern supports. The black pickup was gone. Jonah had set the fire and left the machine running against one of the tower legs. Its steel blade pushed slowly into the timber, driven by a locked throttle. The entire structure leaned toward the creek. I stopped the truck. Ada grabbed my arm. The tower is lost, maybe it was, but the tape in my duffel bag was not the only thing my father had hidden. The dispatch sheets referred to an emergency recording. The metal reel was labeled as a copy. The original had to be somewhere else. Echo leaped from the truck before I opened my door. She did not run toward the burning staircase. She ran toward the brick relay building. Then I heard it. A man was pounding against the steel door from inside. Help me. The voice was weak beneath the roar of the fire. Echo scratched at the entrance. I reached the building and pulled the chain. A new padlock secured it. The man inside struck the door again. Please. Ada arrived behind me. Who is that? I looked through the narrow ventilation opening. A face appeared in the darkness. It belonged to the younger man who had been with Jonah. Blood covered one side of his forehead. He left me, the man gasped. Jonah locked me in. The tower groaned above us. One of the main supports split. The burning structure shifted several feet toward the relay building. The trapped man pressed his face against the vent. There is a fuel line under the floor, he said. When the tower falls, everything goes. Echo looked from the steel door to the burning supports. Then she seized the chain between her teeth and pulled. The lock did not move. The bulldozer continued pushing. The tower leaned farther, and from somewhere beneath the relay building, the original recording machine began to turn. A voice broke through the old signal horn. distorted by fire, distance, and 38 years of silence. But I recognized it immediately. It was my father. "My name is Walter Mercer," the voice said. "If this recording is playing, then they have come back to finish what they started." My father's voice came through the burning tower like a message dragged out of the grave. "My name is Walter Mercer," the old recording said. "If this is playing, then they have come back to finish what they started." The words broke apart beneath the roar of the fire. Above us, one of the tower's main supports split with a sound like a rifle shot. Burning wood fell through the staircase and shattered against the ground. The trapped man struck the steel door again. "Get me out." Echo pulled against the chain until her paws slid through the mud. The padlock held. I ran to my truck and grabbed the recovery cable from behind the seat. It was designed to pull a vehicle out of deep mud, not tear open a railroad building. But the steel door was set into brick that had been weakening for nearly 80 years. Ada followed me. "What do you need?" "Move the truck closer." She stared at the burning tower. "I have not driven through fire since 1974. I looked at her. She took the keys from my hand. "That was a joke, Owen. This is a poor time to become funny. It may be my last opportunity." Ada climbed behind the wheel. I looped the cable through the chain and attached the other end to the truck's rear recovery hook. The man inside continued shouting, "My name is Levi." The last name stopped me for half a second. "You are Jonah's son?" "Yes." "Why did he lock you inside?" "Because I told him I was done." The tower leaned another few inches. Fire ran along the western wall and climbed beneath the roof. The signal horn continued playing my father's recording, but the words were almost impossible to understand. I struck the side of Ada's truck. "Pull." She pressed the accelerator. The cable tightened. The rear tires spun, throwing mud against my legs. The chain groaned. Rust fell from the doorframe again. Ada backed up 2 feet and accelerated harder. The brick surrounding the lock broke first. The chain tore free with a section of mortar attached. The steel door opened several inches before catching against the warped floor. Echo forced her head through the opening. Levi pushed from inside while I pulled from outside. The door opened wide enough for him to crawl through. He was younger than I had first believed, perhaps 30 years old. Blood ran from a cut above his eyebrow. One sleeve of his coat was burned, and his right hand shook badly. The moment he reached open ground, Echo caught the back of his jacket and pulled him farther from the building. Levi collapsed near Ada's truck. "Fuel," he gasped. Jonah ran a fuel line beneath the relay cabinets. "Where does it lead?" "To the bulldozer." The bulldozer continued pushing against the tower support. Its engine roared, the throttle locked in place. A black hose ran from an auxiliary tank behind the cab across the mud and into a trench leading toward the relay building. Jonah had designed the fire to consume both structures. When the tower collapsed, the fuel line would rupture beneath the relay room. The remaining evidence would disappear in an explosion large enough to scatter the bricks across the valley. "Can you shut it off?" I asked. Levi looked toward the bulldozer. "There is a valve behind the cab." Ada knelt beside him. "Then tell me what it looks like." "You cannot go near that machine." Ada removed her coat and wrapped it around Levi's burned arm. "You have known me for less than a minute. Do not start making decisions for me." She ran toward the bulldozer. I called after her, but she did not slow. Echo stood beside the relay building, staring through the open door. The recording continued below the floor. The copy inside my duffel bag could prove my father had returned to the tower. It might even contain the same testimony. But the reel in that underground machine was the original. Without it, Jonah could claim the copy had been altered. The original carried age, physical markings, and a chain of evidence connected directly to Marrow Creek. It could clear my father's name. The tower gave another violent groan. Levi caught my arm. "You cannot go back inside." "Where is the recorder?" "In the service pit beneath the west cabinet." "How do I reach it?" "There is a floor hatch, but the cabinet fell over it." "Is there another exit?" "The drainage tunnel." I looked at Echo. She was already inside. "Of course," I muttered. I followed her. Smoke filled the upper half of the relay room. I stayed low and pulled my shirt over my mouth. The generator had overturned. Burning gasoline moved across the floor in narrow streams. The western relay cabinet leaned against the wall, blocking a square iron hatch. Echo pushed her nose beneath the cabinet and pulled back when the hot metal burned her whiskers. Leave it. She ignored me. I braced both hands against the cabinet. It weighed several hundred pounds. The bottom edge moved less than an inch. Echo barked once. It was not fear, it was direction. She moved to the side and scratched at a length of iron pipe lying beneath the equipment shelves. I understood. I slid the pipe under the cabinet and used a broken brick as a pivot. The first attempt lifted the cabinet only slightly. Smoke thickened around us. My right shoulder burned where old shrapnel pressed against bone. I repositioned the pipe and pushed again. The cabinet rose. Echo drove her shoulder against the lower corner. Together we moved it far enough to expose the hatch. I pulled the iron ring. The hatch opened into darkness. My father's voice became louder. The recorder was directly below us. A wooden ladder descended approximately 10 feet into the service pit. Water covered the bottom. Old cables ran along the walls, and a reel-to-reel machine sat on a steel shelf above the waterline. One reel turned slowly. The other was nearly full. I lowered myself onto the ladder. Echo tried to follow. Stay. She looked at the fire behind her. Then she looked down at me. Echo, stay. This time she obeyed. I descended. My father's voice filled the pit. I began this recording at 11:42 on the night of February 17th, he said. The storm has covered the northern rail. Freight 86 is approaching Marfell Creek. The tape crackled. Another voice entered the recording. It was deeper and smoother. You will clear the Hollow Bend line. My father answered, the siding is closed. Not tonight. The ground beneath the western rail has washed out. No train can use that line. You will show a clear signal. I will not. A chair scraped across the recorded room. Then came the voice of a second man. The inspector is riding in the rear car, Walter. He has copies of every repair contract Vail issued during the last 5 years. My father's breathing changed. You are going to kill an entire crew to destroy paperwork? No one is supposed to die. The train will leave the rail before the bend. We recover the inspector's case, and the storm destroys the rest. You removed the spikes. We loosened enough to stop the train. You cannot control a derailment. No, the second man said, but we can control who gets blamed. A sharp sound followed. Someone had struck my father. I stood waist-deep in darkness, listening to a crime committed before I was old enough to understand why my father sometimes checked the rearview mirror twice. The deeper voice spoke again. Change the signal. My father said nothing. The tape captured footsteps moving away. A door slammed. Then my father whispered close to the hidden microphone. Calvin Vail and Nathaniel Rusk entered the tower at 11:44. They intend to route Freight 86 onto the damaged Hollow Bend siding. I am leaving this machine running. The recording jumped. Static filled the pit. When the voices returned, an alarm was ringing. My father shouted. The signal changed from the relay house. A third voice answered through the old telephone line. I saw Rusk at the emergency circuit. I am going after him. It was Ada's father, Ephraim Pike. The tape shook with a heavy impact. Then the train horn sounded, not the artificial warning Jonah had created. The real freight train, Freight 86, was entering Marrow Creek. My father's voice became urgent. Stop the train. I cannot reach the northern switch. Then open the yard derail. That will put the engine into the coal bank. It is better than the ravine. What about the crew? I am going down. Footsteps thundered across the recorded floor. The tower door opened. Wind roared into the microphone. My father had left the signal room and run toward the tracks. The tape continued recording an empty room. For almost 1 minute, I heard only the storm, the alarm, and the train. Then came a sound so deep that the surface pit vibrated around me, even though the disaster had happened 38 years before. Steel screamed. Glass shattered. The train left the rails. The recording became silent. I reached toward the machine. The tape was not finished. Several minutes passed before another voice entered. Nathaniel Rusk, you should have let it go into the ravine. Calvin Vail answered from farther away. The inspector is dead either way. Mercer opened the yard derail. The engine hit the coal bank instead of the bridge. Then we place his name on the order. Ephraim saw me. Ephraim will learn to forget, and Mercer? A pause followed. Then Calvin Vail said, Mercer has a family. The tape snapped against the reel. The remain link spun loose. I stopped the machine. Above me, Echo barked. A low vibration traveled through the ground. The bulldozer engine changed pitch. Ada had reached the fuel valve, but the tower was moving. I removed the reels from the machine. The metal was hot enough to burn my fingers. The service pit filled with a cracking roar. I looked up. The tower fell. Its upper room came down slowly at first, turning through the smoke as the remaining supports folded. Then gravity took control. The roof struck the relay building. Brick exploded inward. The ladder broke from the wall. I fell into the water. The reels disappeared beneath the surface. Darkness covered me. Something heavy struck my back and forced my chest against the floor. For several seconds, I could not breathe. The sound around me became a single crushing pressure. Then I felt teeth close around the collar of my jacket. Echo pulled. I pushed against the debris above me and freed one shoulder. Echo, let go. She pulled harder. I moved toward her. A narrow opening remained beside the collapsed ladder. Smoke flowed down through it. I reached beneath the water and searched blindly. My hand touched one metal reel, then the other. I pushed both inside my jacket. Echo backed toward the wall. The drainage tunnel was behind her. Its entrance was half covered by broken brick, but the lower section remained open. We crawled into it. The tunnel was too narrow for me to turn around. I moved on my elbows while water carried soot and blood around my hands. Echo stayed ahead, her hind legs slipping against the stones. Behind us, the auxiliary fuel tank ruptured. The explosion entered the tunnel like the fist of a giant. Heat struck my boots. The pressure lifted me from the floor and threw me against the wall. Echo yelped. For one terrible second, she stopped moving. Echo. No response. I crawled forward and touched her rear leg. She kicked weakly. Come on, girl. The tunnel began filling with smoke. I pushed my shoulder beneath her body and forced both of us forward. We reached the ditch as the relay building collapsed. Rain struck my face. Cold air entered my lungs. I rolled onto the wet leaves with Echo against my chest. She tried to stand, her left front paw folded beneath her. Blood darkened the fur near the pad. I examined the leg. No bone was broken. A piece of glass had cut deeply between two toes. Echo tried to pull away and return to the fire. No, she stared toward the wreckage. The recording is safe. I opened my jacket enough to show her the metal reels. Only then did she stop fighting me. Ada stumbled down the ditch. Her face was black with soot. One sleeve had burned away below the elbow, but she was standing. I closed the valve, she said. I noticed. The machine continued moving. I also noticed that. She looked at Echo's paw. Is she hurt? She will need stitches. Ada placed one hand on the dog's neck. Echo accepted the touch, then looked beyond her toward the clearing. Levi lay beside the truck. He had managed to crawl beneath the vehicle before the explosion. He was alive. We carried him into the truck cab and wrapped Echo's paw with part of my shirt. By the time the volunteer fire department arrived, there was almost nothing left to save. The signal tower had fallen across the clearing. The upper room lay on its side. Its roof split open. Rain hissed against the blackened timbers. Marrow Creek had survived nearly 8 decades of winter, neglect, and accusation. Jonah Rusk destroyed it in less than an hour. The county sheriff arrived behind the fire engine. His name was Ellis Wade. He was a broad man in his early 60s with white hair, tired eyes, and a uniform that fit too tightly across his stomach. He listened as Ada described the fire. Then he looked at Levi. Your father did this? Levi held Ada's coat around his shoulders. Yes, you understand what you are accusing him of. He locked me inside. Sheriff Wade glanced at the destroyed building. Why? Because I would not help him kill Mercer. The sheriff turned toward me. Did Jonah fire at you tonight? Yes. Do you have the bullet? It is inside the stone cottage. Do you have a witness? Ada. Sheriff Wade looked at her. She raised her burned arm. I have had better evenings. The sheriff rubbed one hand across his mouth. I will issue an alert for Jonah's truck. But I need everyone to understand that he knows these hills better than my deputies. He is not leaving, Levi said. Sheriff Wade faced him. How do you know? My father does not run from property. He thinks the land belongs to our family. What does he want? Levi looked at the 2 reels beneath my jacket. That I moved closer. What does the recording not tell me? Levi lowered his eyes. My grandfather spent his final years searching for something Walter Mercer took from the wreck. What? A brass key. Ada became still. I thought of the key the county had given me, but Levi shook his head before I could speak. Not the tower key. It belonged to a railway evidence box. Calvin Vale kept original contracts, payoff records, and land deeds inside it. Walter found the box after the derailment. Where is it? My father believes Walter gave the key to your mother. The words struck more deeply than the heat from the explosion. My mother has severe memory loss. Jonah knows. How? Levi looked ashamed. I told him where she lives. I grabbed the front of his coat. Echo stood despite her injured paw. Ada placed herself between us. Owen, I released Levi. When did you tell him? Yesterday. Has Jonah been there? I do not know. The nearest emergency veterinarian was 40 minutes away. I refused to leave Echo, and Ada refused to let me drive while my hands were shaking. Sheriff Wade sent a deputy toward my mother's care facility while we took Echo for treatment. The veterinarian gave her 12 stitches and wrapped the paw in a thick white bandage. Echo remained awake through the entire procedure, watching me as though I were the injured one. Levi was taken to the county hospital. Ada and I reached my mother's facility shortly before dawn. The building stood on a quiet hillside outside Knoxville. Warm lights glowed behind the windows. A nurse met us at the entrance with the deputy. Your mother is safe, she said. I breathed for the first time since leaving the veterinary clinic. Did anyone visit her? The nurse hesitated. A man came yesterday afternoon. He said he was an old family friend. Did he give a name? Jonah Vale. He had used Calvin's last name. What did he want? He asked your mother about a key. She became upset, so we made him leave. Did he touch her? No. Did he enter her room? Not while she was there. That answer carried a warning. We found my mother awake in her chair beside the window. She looked smaller than she had during my last visit. Her white hair rested loosely against her shoulders. A blue blanket covered her knees. Echo entered first. My mother smiled at her. There you are, she said. Echo approached slowly and rested her head beneath my mother's hand. My mother looked at the bandage. You found the fire. I stopped beside the chair. How do you know about the fire? She looked past me. For a moment the room inside her mind seemed to close again. Then I removed the small metal reel from my jacket, her eyes fixed on it. Walter, she whispered. I asked Ada to find a recorder. The facility kept an old reel machine in its recreation room for residents who listened to music recorded decades earlier. We brought it into my mother's room. When my father's voice began, she did not cry. She sat perfectly still. She listened to him describe the threats against our family. She listened to him name Calvin Vale and Nathaniel Rusk. She listened to the train leave the rails. When the tape ended, my mother closed her eyes. He tried to come home, she said. My throat tightened. You knew? He came to the kitchen window 11 years later. It was raining. His face was hurt. Why did you not let him inside? I wanted to. She opened her eyes and looked directly at me. For the first time in months she knew exactly who I was. He told me they had followed him. He said they would kill you if he stayed. What did he give you? A key. Where is it? Her hand moved beneath the blue blanket. She touched the gold chain around her neck. A small brass object hung beside her wedding ring. I had seen that chain during every visit. I had never known the piece of metal was a key. My mother closed her fingers around it. The man who came yesterday tried to take it, she said. I bit his hand. Ada made a quiet sound that might have been laughter. I knelt beside my mother. What does the key open? A box Walter hid before he left again. Where? Her clarity began to fade. She looked toward the window. Stillwater, she whispered. What does that mean? He said the trains could not follow him there. Is it a town? She shook her head. A house. What house? My mother's eyes moved back to mine. Stillwater House. Ada gripped the back of the chair. I looked at her. You know it. My father took me there once when I was a child, she said. It was a convalescent home for railroad workers injured on the job. Where is it? Across the state line in West Virginia. It closed more than 20 years ago. My mother tightened her hand around the brass key. Then she said the words that changed everything. Walter never left Stillwater. I could hear my own heartbeat. What are you saying? She lifted her hand and touched my face. I am saying your father is alive. For 38 years I had believed my father had abandoned me. For less than 10 minutes I had believed he died protecting us. Now my mother was telling me he was alive. I remained kneeling beside her chair, unable to move. Echo rested her head beneath my mother's hand. The dog's eyes stayed on me, as though she understood that the danger in the room was not physical. "Where is he?" I asked. My mother looked toward the window. The sharp clarity that had entered her expression began to fade. "Walter is waiting," she whispered. "At Stillwater House?" She nodded. "Did you see him there?" "Not since the leaves were red." "What year?" Her fingers loosened around the brass key. The leaves were red. I looked at Ada. She understood. Time had become a room without clocks for my mother. A memory from 30 years ago could feel like yesterday. Something that happened yesterday could disappear before breakfast. The fact that she remembered Waterhouse did not prove my father was still alive. It proved only that he had once been there. But hope does not ask permission before entering a wounded man. It came into me hard enough to hurt. The nurse brought my mother a cup of tea. Ada asked questions about Stillwater House, the roads leading into West Virginia, and whether the facility kept records of old visitors. I heard almost none of it. I watched my mother touch Echo's bandaged paw. "You always find him," she said. Echo leaned closer. My mother had never met her before that morning. Still, she spoke to Echo as though they shared a promise. I stood and walked to the far side of the room. Dawn had begun whitening the sky above the hills. The glass reflected a man I barely recognized. My coat was burned. Dried blood marked my forehead. Smoke had darkened the lines around my eyes. Caroline used to tell me that grief made people look farther away than they were. I had spent 18 months becoming distant from everything. Now the possibility of my father being alive pulled every buried feeling back at once. Anger, hope, fear, a child's need for an answer, and beneath all of it, question I was ashamed to ask. If Walter Mercer had survived, why had he never returned? Ada approached quietly. "The drive will take nearly 5 hours in good weather," she said. "The weather is not good, no. We should leave now." "You have not slept. I slept before the fire. You were unconscious beneath a building. That does not count." Ada glanced toward Echo. "She needs rest." Echo stood at the sound of her name. Despite the bandaged paw, her posture was firm. The veterinarian had ordered limited movement for several days. Echo had already decided that recommendation did not apply to her. Ada lowered her voice. "Jonah knows about Stillwater. We do not know that. His father searched for Walter. If your mother knew the location, someone else may have learned it." I looked at the brass key hanging from my mother's neck. "Then we cannot leave it here." My mother refused to remove the chain. When I reached toward it, she closed both hands around the key and pulled it against her chest. "No, Mom, I need it." Walter said no. He gave it to you for safekeeping. He said the wrong man would come. The wrong man already came. Her fear sharpened. "You are not taking it." The nurse moved closer, but I raised one hand. I knelt again. For most of my childhood, my mother had protected me with work. She cleaned offices before sunrise, served lunches at an elementary school, and repaired dresses. Nature, who never knew she sewed beneath a bare light bulb after midnight. She never complained. She also never spoke about my father. I had mistaken silence for weakness. Now I saw that she had guarded his secret through loneliness, poverty, and the slow collapse of her own memory. I placed my hand over hers. "I am not the wrong man," I said. She studied my face. For several seconds I did not know whether she saw me or someone from another time. Then she touched the scar near my temple. "Owen, yes, my little boy, yes." Her eyes filled with tears. "You got old, so did you." She smiled faintly. "I tried not to, I know." Her hands opened, she removed the chain from her neck and placed it in my palm. The brass key was smaller than my thumb. A number had been stamped into one side, but age had nearly erased it. My mother closed my fingers around it. "Bring him home," she said. I wanted to promise. Instead, I kissed her forehead. "I will find out what happened." That was the only promise I could keep. Ada drove the first 2 hours. My truck smelled of smoke, wet wool, and the antiseptic the veterinarian had used on Echo's paw. I sat in the passenger seat with the metal tape reels between my boots and the brass key hanging beneath my shirt. Echo lay across the rear bench. She did not sleep. Every few minutes, she lifted her head and checked the mirrors. The storm moved east with us. Rain covered the highway. Low clouds hid the mountaintops. Water ran down the rock cuts in silver sheets. Ada kept both hands on the wheel. "Stillwater House was built by the Railway Relief Association," she said. Workers injured on the line could recover there if they had no family able to care for them. How did your father know it? He spent 3 months there after his stroke. You said he never spoke clearly again. He could not form sentences, but he understood everything. He drew maps, he wrote single words. Stillwater was one of them. Did he ever write Walter's name? Ada nodded. Many times. Why did you not investigate? I did. I turned toward her. When? After my father died, I visited the house and asked whether Walter Mercer had been admitted. The director told me no one by that name had ever stayed there. You believed him? I believed the records. That is not the same thing. I know that now. What was the director's name? Dr. Raymond Sloan. Is he still alive? He would be close to 90. Echo raised her head. A dark sport utility vehicle had been following us for several miles. It remained 3 car lengths behind, matching every change in speed. Ada noticed it in the mirror. Friend of yours? I have very few friends who follow without introducing themselves. I told her to take the next exit. The vehicle followed. We left the highway and entered a service road lined with closed fuel stations and empty warehouses. Ada turned twice without signaling. The vehicle remained behind us. Jonah? She asked. Possibly. Should I stop? No. I climbed into the rear seat and opened the floor compartment where I kept my pistol. Echo watched my hands. The vehicle accelerated. It pulled alongside us. The passenger window lowered. A young woman held up a badge. State Police, she shouted. I kept the pistol below the window. Ada slowed. The vehicle moved ahead and guided us into the parking lot of an abandoned restaurant. 2 officers stepped out. The woman approached my side with one hand near her holster. Mr. Mercer? Yes. Sheriff Wade requested that we locate you. Jonah Rusk's truck was found near the state line. Was he inside? No. Any blood? Some on the driver's door. We do not know whose. Ada lowered her window. Where was the truck found? Near the old Stillwater Road. The officer studied our expressions. You were already going there. Yes, I said. You should turn around. That is not possible. It is possible. You turn the wheel and drive in the opposite direction. Jonah's looking for a man who may be my father. The officer's posture changed slightly. Sheriff Wade mentioned evidence connected to the Hollow Bend case. I have the original recording. Then it should be placed in police custody. Not until I know which officers Jonah's family paid. The male officer took a step forward. The woman stopped him with one glance. You do not trust us, she said. I do not know you. That is fair. She handed me a card. Sergeant Lena Cross. I grew up 10 miles from Hollow Bend. My uncle died on Freight 86. The name pulled the air from my lungs. What was his name? Samuel Cross. He was the rear brakeman. The inspector had been riding in the rear car. So had her uncle. I am sorry. I do not need you to be sorry. I need you to stay alive long enough to tell me what is on that tape. I looked at the rain running down her face. Jonah may already be at Stillwater. That is why you should wait. For how long? Until my unit arrives. How many officers? 4. When? She did not answer quickly enough. The storm had closed 2 roads. Communications were failing throughout the region. At least an hour, she admitted. An hour was enough time to destroy a building, kill an old man, or remove a box that had survived for decades. I cannot wait. Sergeant Cross looked at Echo. The dog's bandaged paw rested against the seat, but her eyes remained fixed on the tree line. You took that dog into a burning tower. She took me out. The officer exhaled. I cannot legally order you to remain here. No, but I can tell you that the final road to Stillwater is washed out. Is there another route? She looked toward the mountains. There is an old railway service trail from the eastern ridge. Vehicles cannot use it. We can walk. Nearly 4 miles. I have walked farther, not with an injured dog. Echo stood. Sergeant Cross shook her head. That animal has the same expression you do. That is why we work well together. She gave me a handheld radio. The mountain will block most signals. Channel 3 may reach our relay truck once we are closer. You are coming? As soon as I collect my team. She looked directly at me. Do not confront Jonah alone. I placed the radio inside my jacket. I will avoid it when possible. That is not a promise. No, we left the truck at the eastern ridge shortly before noon. Rain had become sleet. Ada wore an old canvas coat from my emergency box. I carried the reels inside a waterproof bag. The brass key remained against my chest. Echo moved beside me on 3 strong legs, touching the injured paw down only when the ground was level. The railway service trail followed the mountain through stands of hemlock and bare oak. In several places, landslides had covered the path with stone. No vehicle could have passed, but a man could. We found Jonah's prints in the mud. He was ahead of us. The trail descended into a narrow valley where a river moved dark and slow between the trees. Stillwater House stood on the opposite bank. It was larger than I expected. 3 stories of gray stone rose beneath a steep slate roof. Tall chimneys stood at each end. A covered bridge connected the main building to a smaller infirmary wing. Most of the windows were boarded. One was open. Smoke rose from a chimney. Someone lived there. The old railway bridge had partially collapsed. Only a narrow maintenance walkway remained above the water. Echo tested the first board. It held. Ada looked down at the river. I have never enjoyed heights. You drove through a burning tower. I did not look down. We crossed one at a time. The water moved 20 feet beneath us. Sleet covered the boards. Echo slipped once, recovered, and continued without hesitation. On the opposite bank, we found blood. A small amount marked the stone steps leading to the house. Jonah had been injured, but not badly enough to stop. The front door stood open. Warm air carried the smell of coal smoke, medicine, and boiled vegetables. Inside, the entrance hall was clean. Someone had swept the floor recently. An oil lamp burned on a table. Framed photographs of railway workers lined the walls. Their faces watched us enter. An old man appeared at the end of the hall. He held a double-barreled shotgun. Stop there. His body was thin, but the weapon remained steady. He had white hair, a narrow face, and clear brown eyes. A dark cardigan hung loosely around his shoulders. "Dr. Sloan?" Ada asked. The old man recognized her. "Ada Pike, you remember me. I remember every person who came here asking the wrong question." What was the right question? He looked at me. "Who are you, Owen Mercer?" The shotgun lowered several inches. Behind me, Echo inhaled sharply. Spoof past my leg. Dr. Sloan aimed the weapon again. "Hold the dog. She will not hurt you. She is not looking at me." Echo crossed the hall toward a closed door. Her tail lowered. Her steps became slow and deliberate. She pressed her nose against the wood. Then she whined. It was the first time I had heard her make that sound since Caroline died. Dr. Sloan closed his eyes. "He heard the vehicle," he said. "He thought it was you." I approached the door. My hand stopped above the knob. Every version of my father lived on the other side. The coward I hated, the dead man I mourned, the witness who tried to save a train, the stranger who allowed me to grow old without him. I opened the door. A small room faced the river. A hospital bed stood beside the window. The man sitting in it was 80 years old. His body had become narrow beneath a wool blanket. White hair covered his head. One side of his face pulled slightly downward, the mark of an old injury or stroke. But I recognized his hands. I remembered them repairing a bicycle chain when I was 6. I remembered grease beneath the nails. I remembered one of those hands resting on my shoulder the final morning he left. Walter Mercer looked at me, his eyes filled with a grief so immediate that I knew he recognized me too. "Owen," he said. My name barely crossed the room. Echo reached him first. She placed her head on the bed beside his hand. He touched her ears. "Good dog." I stood several feet away. "You are alive." "Yes, you knew where I was." His face tightened for a while. "You knew Mom was alone." "Yes, you knew what people said about you." "Yes, and you stayed here." Dr. Sloan stepped into the doorway. "Your father suffered serious injuries after returning to Marrow Creek. For years he could not travel without assistance. That was 11 years after the wreck." "What about the years before that?" "I was afraid." The honesty angered me more than an excuse would have. "You were afraid?" "Yes, so was Mom. I know, I was 9. I know, I waited at the window every night, for a year." Walter's eyes closed. "I know. You do not get to say that." Echo looked back at me. My voice had risen. Walter did not defend himself. "That made it worse. I told myself leaving protected you," he said. "At first it did. Then the danger became an excuse. Every year I stayed away made returning harder. Shame can become a prison, Owen. After enough time, a man starts guarding the door himself. I wanted to hate him. Part of me still did. But the man before me was not the giant who had controlled my childhood memories. He was old, sick, and trembling beneath a blanket. He was also telling the truth. Not the heroic truth I wanted. The smaller, uglier truth. He had tried to protect us. Then he had failed to come home, Both things could be true. Walter looked at Echo. I asked your mother to send you here if the tower was ever sold. She never told me. She promised not to unless the key was threatened. Jonah threatened her yesterday. Walter's hand tightened around the blanket. He found her? She is safe, for now, Ada said. Walter looked toward Dr. Sloan, the box. Sloan moved to an old wardrobe and removed a wooden cane. He twisted the handle. A narrow metal rod slid from inside. At its end was a hook. The evidence box is beneath the house, Walter said. Inside the original water intake chamber. Still water, I said. He nodded. The river enters a stone reservoir beneath the foundation. Trains could not reach it. Fire could not reach it. Can Jonah? If he knows where to look. A gunshot sounded below us. Dr. Sloan turned toward the hall. A second shot shattered the oil lamp near the entrance. Jonah had entered the house. Give me the key, he shouted. His voice rose through the stairwell. I know you are here, Mercer. Walter tried to stand. His legs failed beneath him. I caught his shoulders and lowered him back onto the bed. Where is the chamber entrance? In the infirmary wing, Dr. Sloan said. The covered bridge. Ada raised the revolver she still carried. I will take Walter. No, Walter. Jonah wants the key. He will follow Owen. That is the idea, I said. I handed the tape reels to Ada. Get them across the bridge. What are you going to do? Give Jonah something to chase. I removed the brass key from my neck and held it where the hallway light could catch it. Jonah appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Blood covered one side of his coat. A bandage wrapped his left hand where my mother had bitten him. His pistol pointed upward. You look like Walter, he said. I will try not to take that as an insult. Throw down the key. Come and take it, he fired. The bullet struck the banister beside my head. I ran toward the covered bridge. Echo followed. No. Stay with Walter. She ignored me. We crossed into the infirmary wing as another shot tore through the wooden wall. The corridor ended at a staircase leading downward. Water echoed beneath the floor. I descended. Echo remained beside me. The lower level was built from stone. Old treatment rooms opened on either side. Rusted beds stood beneath pipes covered in mineral stains. At the end of the corridor, a circular iron door had been set into the wall. The brass key fit the lock. Behind us, Jonah entered the stairwell. I turned the key. The door opened inward. Cold air moved through the gap. Beyond it, narrow steps descended into a chamber filled with black water. A stone walkway circled the reservoir. At the center, a rusted intake platform rose above the surface. A metal evidence box sat chained to the platform. I stepped inside. Echo followed. Jonah reached the bottom of the stairs. He smiled when he saw the box. My grandfather spent half his life looking for that. He should have spent it asking forgiveness. He did not believe in forgiveness. Neither do you. I believe in ownership. He raised the pistol. Echo moved between us. Jonah aimed at her. I threw the brass key across the chamber. It struck the stone and slid beneath the railing. Jonah turned his head. Echo attacked. She crossed the distance on 3 legs and hit his gun arm before he could fire. The pistol discharged into the ceiling. Stone fragments fell into the water. Jonah struck Echo with his injured hand. She lost her grip and crashed against the walkway. I drove into him. We hit the railing together. Jonah's pistol fell into the reservoir. He struck my wounded shoulder. Pain traveled down my arm. Then he pulled a knife from his belt. Echo seized his coat. Jonah slashed backward. The blade cut through her harness. I caught his wrist. We struggled beside the black water. He was stronger than I expected. Desperation had stripped away his age. You think that box changes anything? He said through clenched teeth. Vale owned judges. My grandfather owned sheriffs. Every deed in that case has been legal for decades. Then why are you afraid? His expression changed. That was the answer. I twisted his wrist until the knife fell. Jonah struck me with his forehead. The chamber flashed white. I fell against the railing. He kicked Echo away and ran toward the key. The old stone beneath him cracked. His foot broke through the walkway. Jonah fell to one knee. The remaining section collapsed. He dropped into the reservoir. The water closed over his head. For 1 second, I stood still. This man had threatened my mother. He had tried to burn me alive. He had locked his own son inside a building and left him to die. Then Echo jumped into the water after him. She did not understand revenge. She understood only that a man was drowning. I followed. The reservoir was colder than winter air. My boots struck no bottom. Jonah surfaced once, choking, then sank beneath the intake platform. Echo caught his coat. I grabbed the back of her harness and pulled both of them toward the broken walkway. Together we dragged Jonah onto the stone. He coughed water and rolled onto his side. Echo stood above him, soaked and shaking. Her bandage had come loose. Blood moved through the wet fur around her paw. I knelt beside her. "You saved him." She leaned against me. Sirens sounded outside. Sergeant Cross had reached Stillwater. Jonah began laughing. The sound was weak but certain. "You still lost," he said. I looked toward the center platform. The evidence box was gone. The chain had been cut before we arrived. Only an empty hook remained above the water. Jonah had not come to open the box. Someone else had already taken it. Ada appeared in the chamber doorway, with Walter supported against one shoulder. Dr. Sloan stood behind them. Walter saw the empty platform. His face lost all color. "Who knew?" I asked. He stared at the severed chain. "Only 3 people. You, Dr. Sloan, and my mother." Walter shook his head. "Your mother never knew the exact location." "Then who was the third?" Footsteps moved across the covered bridge above us. Slow. Uneven. Levi Rusk entered the doorway carrying the missing evidence box. A pistol rested on top of it. He looked at his father lying beside the reservoir. Then he looked at me. "I am sorry, Owen," he said, "but this was never about clearing Walter's name." He lifted the box. "It was about finding what your father hid beneath the evidence." Behind him, the covered bridge erupted in flames. The covered bridge caught fire from both ends. Flames ran along the dry roof supports faster than the rain could slow them. Smoke poured into the stone chamber and curled above the black reservoir. Levi Rusk stood in the doorway with the evidence box held against his chest. A pistol rested across its lid. Behind him, the only passage back to the main house was disappearing. Sergeant Cross shouted from somewhere beyond the fire, "State Police, drop the weapon." Levy looked over his shoulder, but he did not lower the gun. "My father said there was a second compartment," he said. "Something Walter hid beneath the railroad records." Jonah coughed beside the reservoir. His clothes released water onto the stone floor. Echo stood between him and me, trembling from cold, pain, and exhaustion. Walter leaned against Ada in the doorway. His face was pale. "There is no money in that box," he said. Levi gave a bitter smile. "My grandfather did not spend 30 years hunting old paper. He was not hunting money. Then what was he hunting?" Walter looked toward the evidence box. Proof that the valley never belonged to Calvin Vale. The fire moved closer. A burning plank fell from the covered bridge and shattered behind Levi. He flinched, but held his position. "What does that mean?" I asked. Walter's voice weakened. "Before the railway came through Marrow Creek, 28 families owned the land between Hollow Bend and the Eastern Ridge. The company promised them permanent work, homes, and a share of the mineral rights." Ada stared at him. "There were no private mineral rights in the county records, because Vale removed them." Walter nodded toward the box. "The original agreements are inside. He replaced them with transfer deeds and used the derailment settlement to seize the remaining parcels." Jonah pushed himself upright. "Do not listen to him." Levi looked at his father. "You told me there were bearer bonds." "There are." Walter shook his head. "No, Nathaniel Rusk invented that story so his own son would keep searching after he died." Jonah's expression hardened. "My father saw the box." "He saw the outer compartment," Walter said. "He never found what I placed beneath it." Levi's hands tightened. "What is beneath it?" "A list of every family Vale cheated. Every worker he paid to remain silent. Every widow who was told her husband caused his own death." The fire crossed another roof beam. Heat rolled through the doorway. Sergeant Cross shouted again. "Levi, put the box down and move away from the bridge." Levi looked toward the flames, then back at Walter. "That list is worth nothing." "It is worth their names," Walter said. Jonah laughed. "Names do not buy land." "No," Ada answered. "But original deeds do." Everyone looked at her. She stepped away from Walter and wiped soot from her face. "If the agreements predate the railway transfers, every parcel taken through Vale's false deeds can be challenged. Timber rights, mineral leases, recovery contracts, all of it." Levi looked at the box differently, not with disappointment. With calculation. "How much land?" "Nearly half the valley," Walter said. Jonah rose fully. "Levi, bring it to me." Levi did not move. Jonah held out one wet hand. That belongs to our family. You locked me in a burning building. You lost your nerve. You were going to let me die. I knew Mercer would open the door. You did not know anything. Jonah took one step toward him. Echo growled. Jonah stopped. Levi's pistol shifted from me to his father. The movement was small, but every person in the chamber saw it. Jonah's face changed. You are pointing that weapon at the wrong man. I spent my whole life pointing it at the men you chose. I gave you a business. You gave me stolen land, false contracts, and a name that makes people close their doors. I gave you power. You gave me fear. The words seemed to surprise Levi as soon as he spoke them. Jonah's expression became almost gentle. It was the most dangerous look I had seen on him. Bring me the box, son. Levi looked down at it. For a moment he was a boy standing before the only father he had ever known. Then Jonah lunged. He moved faster than any injured man should have been able to move. Levi fired. The bullet struck the stone wall. Jonah hit him at the waist. The evidence box fell. It struck the edge of the walkway and slid toward the reservoir. I dove. My fingers touched the handle. The box pulled me across the wet stone. Half of it passed over the edge. The weight dragged my shoulder against the railing. Behind me, Levi and Jonah fought for the pistol. Echo barked and tried to reach them, but her injured paw collapsed beneath her. The gun fired again. Dr. Sloan cried out. He fell against the doorway, one hand pressed to his side. Ada caught him before he reached the floor. The box slipped farther. I had two choices: hold the evidence, or help the people behind me. For most of my life I had believed the truth about my father would repair something inside me. I thought one answer could remove 38 years of anger, shame, and loneliness. But the truth had already given me its most difficult lesson. A man could do something brave and still fail his family. A father could love his son and still be too afraid to return. A piece of evidence could clear a name. It could not recover a childhood. Behind me, Walter called my name, not as a warning, as a plea. I released the box. It fell into the reservoir. The black water swallowed it without a splash loud enough to be heard over the fire. I turned. Levi lay on the floor. Jonah knelt above him with both hands around his throat. The pistol rested several feet away. I crossed the chamber and drove my shoulder into Jonah. We struck the stone wall. He hit the floor but caught my injured arm and pulled me down with him. Pain exploded through my shoulder. Jonah reached for my throat. Echo seized his sleeve. He struck her across the face. Walter left Ada's support. He took 2 unsteady steps into the chamber. Jonah. The old man looked toward him. Walter held the metal rod from Dr. Sloan's cane. His hands shook, but his eyes did not. This began with our fathers, Walter said. It ends with us. Jonah pushed me away and rose. You should have died in the ravine. You should have learned from the men who did. Walter pressed the rod against the wheel beside the reservoir gate. Dr. Sloan lifted his head. Do not turn that. Walter looked at me. The intake tunnel opens beneath the eastern bank. I understood. The reservoir had an emergency drainage channel. Opening it would lower the water and carry the evidence box toward the river outlet. It would also flood the lower corridor. How long? I asked. Less than a minute. The covered bridge collapsed. Fire filled the upper stairwell. Burning timber blocked the path to the main house. Sergeant Cross and her officers could not reach us from that direction. The drainage tunnel was our only exit. Walter pushed the rod. The wheel resisted. I joined him. Together we forced it a quarter turn. Old machinery groaned beneath the chamber. The water began to move. A slow circle formed at the center of the reservoir. Jonah saw what we were doing. No. He rushed toward the wheel. Levi caught his ankle. Jonah fell. Levi looked at me from the floor. Open it. I turned the wheel again. The current strengthened. Water pulled against the intake platform. The severed chain lifted and struck the stone. The evidence box appeared beneath the surface. It moved toward an iron grate in the eastern wall. Jonah kicked Levi in the chest and crawled after it. Leave it, I shouted. He ignored me. Water began spilling across walkway through cracks in the reservoir wall. Ada and Dr. Sloan moved toward the lower corridor. Echo tried to follow, but her injured leg failed again. I lifted her. She weighed more than 70 pounds, and my damaged shoulder nearly gave way. She rested her head against my neck but continued watching Walter. Take her, I told Levi. He struggled to his feet. Echo growled when he reached for her. Easy, I said. He is helping." She allowed him to take part of her weight. Walter remained beside the wheel. "Come on," I said. "It is not open far enough." Water climbed over our boots. Jonah had reached the eastern grate. He pushed one arm through the bars, trying to catch the box, as the current pressed it against the other side. "Father," Levi called. Jonah did not look back. The box was all he could see. Walter pushed the wheel again. The grate shook. A rusted locking pin broke loose. The gate opened outward. The evidence box disappeared into the drainage tunnel. Jonah reached after it. The current took him. His body struck the iron frame and folded through the opening. Levi lunged forward. I caught the back of his coat. "Let me go. You cannot reach him. He is my father, I know." Jonah surfaced beyond the grate. For 1 second, his face appeared in the rushing darkness. Then he vanished into the tunnel. Levi stopped fighting. The water rose above our knees. Dr. Sloan pointed toward a narrow service opening behind the empty intake platform. "That passage follows the drainage channel." We entered one at a time. Ada supported Dr. Sloan. Levi carried Echo beneath her chest while I supported her hindquarters. Walter came behind me. The tunnel descended through the foundation. Cold water rushed around our legs. The only light came from Ada's small flashlight and the orange glow of the burning house behind us. We moved slowly. Dr. Sloan's wound left dark drops in the water. Walter's breathing became labored. The tunnel narrowed until our shoulders touched both walls. Ahead, fresh air entered through an opening. Sergeant Cross's voice reached us through the storm. "This way." We emerged beneath the eastern riverbank. 2 officers waited beside the outlet. They helped Ada and Dr. Sloan climb onto the rocks. Levi passed Echo through the opening. She immediately turned and searched for me. "I am here." Her body relaxed. Walter reached the final step, then collapsed. I caught him before his head struck the stone. His skin felt cold. "Stay with me." He looked toward the burning house. "I waited too long. We are outside. I do not mean the house." The officers carried Dr. Sloan and Walter toward higher ground. Sergeant Cross approached me. "Where is Jonah?" "In the drainage channel." She directed 2 officers downstream. Levi stood alone near the river. He stared into the current. The man who had raised him was somewhere beneath that water. Perhaps alive, perhaps not. I knew something about fathers who disappeared into darkness. I placed one hand on his shoulder. Levi did not thank me. He did not need to. Echo suddenly lifted her head. She tested the air. Then she limped downstream. "Echo." She continued. I followed. The river widened beyond a bend. Broken branches, black water, and pieces of burning wood moved with the current. Echo stopped beside a fallen sycamore. She barked. Jonah lay caught between the branches. His face remained above water, but barely. One arm hung at an unnatural angle. The evidence box was trapped beneath his body. Sergeant Cross and another officer pulled him onto the bank. Jonah coughed and opened his eyes. He saw Levi first. "You came for the box," he whispered. Levi looked at him for a long time. "No." He knelt beside his father. "I came because you were drowning." Jonah closed his eyes. For the first time, he had nothing to say. The officers placed him under arrest before the ambulance arrived. The evidence box had been damaged by water, but its seals remained intact. Sergeant Cross photographed it on the riverbank before anyone opened it. Inside were the original dispatch orders from the night of the derailment. The forged transfer deeds, payment records bearing Calvin Vale's signature, statements from workers who had been threatened, and a metal plate covering a false bottom. My father's handwriting appeared beneath it. These names were never debts, they were people. Ada used the brass key to open the hidden compartment. There were no bonds, no money, no treasure. There were 28 original land agreements and a handwritten ledger identifying the family's hot property had been stolen. The final page contained a list of the men killed or injured because Calvin Vale refused to repair the Hollow Bend line. Beside each name, Walter had written what he knew about them. Samuel Cross, rear brakeman, 32 years old. Played guitar at church, had 2 daughters. Thomas Bell, engineer, 58 years old, plans to retire in spring. Carried peppermint candy for children. Henry Lowe, inspector, 46 years old, refused a bribe, wanted the truth entered into the record. They were not numbers in an accident report. My father had made them witnesses. Weeks passed before the story reached the national news. The recording was authenticated by 3 separate laboratories. The paper, ink, and magnetic tape were confirmed to be from the correct period. Jonah Rusk survived. He was charged with attempted murder, arson, evidence tampering, unlawful imprisonment, and several financial crimes connected to Cinder Ridge recovery. Levi testified against him. The Hollow Bend investigation was reopened. Walter Mercer's name was formally cleared. The state issued a statement declaring that he had attempted to prevent the derailment and had directed the train toward the coal bank, saving the rear cars from falling into the ravine. 3 men still died, but 11 others lived because my father refused to obey. The newspapers called him a hero. Walter hated the word. "Heroes come home," he told me. We were sitting in his hospital room when he said it. Echo lay between our chairs with a new bandage around her paw. Dr. Sloan was recovering 2 floors below us. Ada had gone to find coffee strong enough to insult the hospital staff. "You saved those men," I said. "I left you. Both are true." Walter looked down at his hands. "I do not know how to repair what I did." "You cannot." He nodded slowly. The answer hurt him. It hurt me too. For years I thought forgiveness meant declaring that the pain no longer mattered. I had been wrong. Forgiveness was not forgetting the wound. It was deciding the wound would no longer control every road ahead. "I cannot give you the years back," Walter said. "No, I cannot be the father you needed. No, what can I be?" I looked at the old man sitting across from me. Not the hero in the newspaper, not the coward in my memory, just a man who had made one brave choice, followed by many fearful ones, and had lived long enough to regret them. "You can be here tomorrow," I said. Walter began to cry. He turned toward the window, embarrassed. I pretended not to notice. Echo did not. She rose, placed her head on his knee, and remained there until his hand rested between her ears. Marrow Creek signal tower was gone. The county planned to clear the remains, but Ada stopped them. She organized the families named in the hidden ledger. Sergeant Cross contacted descendants of the train crew. Levi provided records showing that Cinder Ridge Recovery had prepared new mineral leases for the disputed land. Within 6 months, a court froze every transfer connected to Calvin Vale's forged deeds. Some families wanted their property returned. Others wanted compensation. Several donated their shares to create a public trust. The trust purchased the ruins of Stillwater House and the land surrounding Marrow Creek. They asked me to oversee the restoration. At first, I refused. I was not a carpenter. I was not a historian. I had no experience running anything that did not involve orders, weapons, or men trained to enter dangerous places. Ada listened to my reasons and placed a ring of keys on the table. "Then learn something new," she said. Walter moved into a small room on the first floor after the eastern wing was repaired. My mother came to live there several months later. Some days she recognized him. Some days she believed he was a young railroad operator arriving for supper. Walter never corrected her. He sat beside her, held her hand, and answered whatever name she called him. Levi joined the restoration crew. People in the valley did not trust him at first. He understood why. He arrived before sunrise, repaired stone walls, replaced broken windows, and left after everyone else had gone home. He never asked anyone to forget his name. He simply gave them new reasons to remember it. Sergeant Cross donated her uncle's guitar to the main room. Ada placed her father's photograph beside the restored dispatch records. Dr. Sloan returned as the building's first medical advisor, though he complained that everyone ignored his orders. They did. Echo recovered more slowly than the veterinarian expected. The damage to her paw ended the long hikes she once loved. Cold mornings made her limp. Stairs became difficult. Still, every day before dawn, she walked the full length of the first-floor hallway and checked each door. Walter called it her inspection route. I called it work she had assigned herself. One winter morning, nearly a year after the fire, I found her sitting beside the entrance before sunrise. Snow covered the valley. The repaired windows glowed with warm light. Coffee brewed in the kitchen. Upstairs, former railroad workers, veterans, widows, and people with nowhere else to go slept beneath a roof that no longer belonged to one family. Walter joined me at the door. He moved with a cane now. "Storm coming," he said. "I know you should bring in more wood." "I already did," he nodded. For several minutes we watched snow settle across the old service trail. Then Walter reached into his pocket. He placed a small blue bowl in my hands. A crack ran down one side. My mother had kept it all those years. I repaired it, he said. A thin line of gold filled the crack. It will not hold milk, he added. That is all right. I thought you might want it. I looked at the bowl. When I was a child, I had believed broken things had only two futures. They were repaired until no one could see the damage, or they were thrown away. Age had taught me something different. Some things could never be restored to what they were. But the broken line could be honored. It could become part of the object instead of the end of it. I placed the bowl on the shelf beside the old railroad photograph. Echo leaned against my leg. Walter stood beside me. Neither of us spoke. We had already lost too many years trying to find the perfect words. Outside, snow covered the abandoned track bed. The trains would never return. The tower would never stand again. Caroline would never walk through the front door. My childhood would never be repaired. But upstairs my mother was sleeping safely. Beside me stood the father I once believed had abandoned me. At my feet rested the dog who had led me through fire, darkness, and every locked door I was afraid to open. I bought Marrow Creek for $1 because I needed somewhere to disappear. Instead, it became the place where everything hidden finally came home. Some wounds are not healed by discovering that we were right. They are healed when we finally understand the full truth. Owen spent most of his life believing his father had chosen to abandon him. Walter spent those same years believing shame had taken away his right to return. Neither man could recover the time they lost. But they could decide what to do with the days still waiting for them. Perhaps that is the quiet lesson Echo understood from the beginning. Loyalty does not mean pretending someone never failed us. Forgiveness does not erase the past. It simply keeps the past from taking every piece of the future. Many of us carry an unanswered question about someone we loved, a parent who left, a friend who disappeared, a conversation that came too late. We may never receive the explanation we hoped for, but we can still choose to become a safe place for someone else. If this story brought back a memory, comforted your heart, or reminded you that broken lives can still become meaningful, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support gives us the strength to continue creating stories about courage, faithful dogs, second chances, and the quiet bonds that help people find their way home. Until our next story, may you be protected on every road. May peace remain beside you. And may no one you love ever doubt that they are remembered.